All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, striking up the live stream as USC falls to BYU on the road in overtime, 30-27. We invite you to leave your comments and your questions on the live chat. I will be monitoring it. We've got Matt Lowry on the line from SB Nation's Conquest Chronicles. He covers USC football each and every day, joins us on a regular basis to break down USC. And Matt, it was 1 week ago that, this USC team broke out, looked so impressive in the second half, going on a 42-3 run against Stanford. And 1 week later, not that they played poorly, we knew that the assignment would be difficult on the road in Provo, a tough place to play. Probably should have won the game, had a number of opportunities to do so, but fell 30-27 in overtime. So just kind of before we dive into the granular and grind it down, your thoughts about the performance?
I felt the performance wasn't surprising to me. I knew that the defense would have an issue against Zach Wilson and BYU's offense. Wilson, as you know, he was elusive. They really had a hard time really getting to him. And I knew that was going to be a difficult task as it was. However, I didn't expect the offense to struggle as much as it did. BYU dropped 8 in the coverage, which we knew what was going to happen. And it really flustered the air raid. It flustered USC's passing attack as they turned to the ground. Not as much success because the USC offensive line just they were struggling with the 3-man rush. They were getting outplayed. They were getting manhandled in the trenches. However, the run game did see some success, but just not enough to get critical points and to get them to win, to do enough to get them to win. But all in all, I felt as if this was a letdown performance compared to last week. And that was something that I talked about in an article earlier in the week, that this was something that was bound to happen. We were bound to see a letdown from last week's game. And then especially with Utah coming up, this had the makings of a trap game, and it happened.
There you have it. Trojans go down 30-27 to BYU. It was a game in which neither team necessarily was able to break free and gain any kind of significant lead. BYU went up 17-10 at one point. USC scored 2 consecutive touchdowns. They were ahead by a touchdown, and again, back and forth, and some high drama in the closing minutes as USC was able to, it appeared as though that they might be able to hold off BYU, but BYU scored late, of course, to tie the game and send it into overtime. Specifically on Slovis, you certainly looked at his performance to a certain extent. 3 interceptions. The final one, obviously, was the final nail in the coffin. How would you assess his performance overall in the 3 picks? Because obviously, not necessarily his fault. Offensive line, wide receivers not catching the ball or not being in position. Your assessment of his play, considering it's a second game out there.
With Slovis, this was more of a letdown performance as well, and that was expected coming into this game. His first road start, against against a decent BYU team. We're not going to sit here and say BYU was absolutely horrible. They weren't. It was a decent BYU team. It was just something that was bound to happen. He had freshman moments. The interception, his first interception, which gave BYU a short field, was just an amazing play by the linebacker. The other one, ball was tipped. And then the last one, again, ball was tipped. So it wasn't really his fault. They didn't really allow him to throw that much. After the interception, they just continuously ran the ball. But you can see it was the usual, how can I put it? It was the usual freshman mistakes that was made. It was the usual freshman performance, first road start, and it really wasn't on him. It wasn't like it was his fault. Like he threw the interceptions. You're wondering what on earth is he looking at? He avoided throwing 4 to 5 picks. Thankfully some of those were dropped, but you expect that from a freshman.
Absolutely. Second start, as you mentioned, first one on the road. Maybe not necessarily the most difficult place in the nation to play, but a difficult place to play. Hostile crowd. And certainly BYU is known down through the years as making life difficult on opponents who may be a little bit more talented than them, that they've pulled off these kind of minor upsets. This was a minor upset. USC was a 4-point favorite, so they're considered about a touchdown better team. But then on the road, you give about 3 points to the home team, and there you have it. It's a back and forth affair that goes to overtime. BYU's second consecutive overtime win after losing to Utah in week 1. And speaking of Utah, we'll talk about them in a few minutes. USC's defensive play, obviously, they didn't get the stop when they needed to down near the end of regulation.
No, they didn't. And I think USC's defense struggled this game. Zach Wilson, again, was just able to get loose and make some pretty I don't want to say uncharacteristic plays, but some very Johnny Manziel-like plays. How the way it looked was just, I knew this was going to be an issue. I also felt the run game for BYU was also a thing too, but with a lot of reverses, a lot of trick plays, that's just how BYU basically just threw everything. They threw everything at them offensively. And the USC defense just wasn't able to get the stops that they needed to make. But again, that's what you expect from a young defense. But young defense or not, I think USC has to do better. They couldn't get pressure on Wilson. They couldn't make him uncomfortable. He had time to sit back. And as I was messaging somebody, I believe I was messaging a friend of mine, I told him, hey, Zach Wilson is having all the time in the world. Zach Wilson had enough time to make a ham sandwich and to drink tea in the backfield while looking for his receivers and pick the defense apart. And I don't think Pendergast did anything to create even more pressure. I didn't see as many blitzes from Pendergast, and we typically tend to see that. We typically tend to see blitzes from Pendergast, but it was very unusual that he didn't create as much pressure. But also a thing too is Christian Rector was out for this game. I don't know how much of a difference that makes, but that I believe played a good factor as well.
Zach Wilson, 20 of 33, 280 yards passing, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, did not turn the ball over. 20 of 33 is decent. 280 through the air on 20 completions is a little bit high. It's about 14 yards per completion, so that's a pretty healthy number, not atrocious. Tyson Williams, the South Carolina original signee who played there for the Gamecocks, was productive, didn't completely tear the USC defense to shreds, but 99 yards on 19 carries at about 5.2 yards per carry. Again, productive. There's some comments in the live chat pertaining to play calling. So if you just look at run pass ratio as an indication, and I want to emphasize indication of how aggressive an offense is, 34 passes, 45 runs. Of course, there are situations in which, especially in a close game like this, that you have to pass third down and long, or when you need to score near the end of the game, as they did their last drive. But basically about a 60-40 run to pass ratio. Were you pretty happy with that? Again, some comments made in the comment section concerning not lack of aggression, being aggressive in play calling.
I had no issue with the play calling in all honesty. And I think what a lot of people have to look at is look at what BYU was giving USC. BYU dropped 8 into the 8 in the coverage, which we knew that was going to happen. After the first drive, after the picks, they were doing the same thing. They dropped in the zone coverage. Really, Slovis didn't have as much time to look and to pick apart the defense as much as he did against Stanford. So USC went and ran the ball. What a lot of people don't understand is BYU in the 2 games that they played this season, BYU is ranked 128th out of 130 teams in run defense. And USC turned to the run to help them out. If you want to say it's not aggressive because they weren't throwing the ball as much because BYU was throwing different looks and coverages, then so be it. But I can't criticize USC's lack of play calling or lack of aggressiveness when the freshmen already threw 2 interceptions and they're disguising coverages, which is something that Slovis has not seen in college yet. So you're expecting a true freshman to make reads like that against the college defense. That was the complaint with JT Daniels last year. So when they turn to something that's actually working and that's there, I mean, I don't see how it's a terrible play calling situation. I think the play calling was smart to run the ball. Would I have liked to see USC throw a little bit more after that? I would, but I can't be mad at the play calling that was called there.
So it's a great point you make about BYU's rush defense. First 2 weeks of the season, they played Tennessee, they played Utah. 2 very good running teams, but not like killer running teams. Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, not of that degree of rushing talent, or a Naval Academy, or an academy that just runs the ball down your throat constantly. So the rushing figures are pretty legit against their defense in regards to them facing 2, again, decent, probably top 30 to 40 rushing attacks, but not great rushing attacks. So it speaks to their rushing issues defending the run. Marquis Stepp had a nice game. He was around 6 or 7 yards per carry. They only threw 1 pass in the third quarter to USC. Of course, they had the costly interceptions that were the fault of many. They netted just the 1 field goal in the last 3 drives that they had in regulation as well. USC loses to BYU again, 30-27. Exciting game in Provo. And for the Trojans, they look to the Pac-12. So this loss is costly, more so for the Pac-12 than it is for USC, because of all the losses to the North Division. And that's another thing that comes to mind is USC got extremely healthy against the Stanford team that you would normally take in that performance and say, hey, man, they ripped up Stanford for 45 points. Well, Stanford went to South Florida and played Central Florida, I should say, and wow, gave up a 45 spot, and it could have been a lot worse than that had it not been just a blowout game in which the Knights were able to kick it into cruise control for much of the second half. So, Matt, we've got a short week, and want to remind everyone, if you've got any comments or questions for Matt Lowry, you can join him on Conquest Chronicles on SB Nation, also right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. So leave your comments and questions in the live chat. Also, the super chat is on if you want to contribute to our channel, help us build the vision. I think many of you who watch us on a regular basis understand what we're trying to build here, and we're in the process of doing so. USC now plays maybe its most important game of the year because it's direct competition. And let's not forget and bypass and ignore what Arizona State accomplished just a few hours ago at East Lansing against maybe the best defense in the country, Michigan State. A horrible offense, but one of the best defenses in the country, Michigan State, pulling that game out 10-7. So maybe ASU plays himself into the race. But obviously, Matt, based on preseason perception and projections and last season's result, Utah, the gold standard right now in the Pac-12 South. And now USC's got a huge one on Friday night. Short week to prepare for the Utes, who had a bit of a bye week and playing a bit of a scrimmage against an FCS opponent today.
Yeah, and I think the thing is with this game is it's going to be very huge for USC because this is where we see how USC bounces back. That's the big thing here. I think right now the huge blueprint is this is how you stop USC's passing game. You can expect the Utes, who's a very, very good defense, you can expect the Utes to do about the same thing that BYU did, which was drop guys in the coverage and force USC to run the ball. And the thing is that plays in the Utah's hand because Utah is a very physical team. Utah's a very physical team in the front with their front seven. So this is going to be very crucial to USC. If USC comes into this game the same way they did against BYU, it won't be pretty. However, I think USC can do enough to actually pull off a win here. They can do enough to pull off a win, but it's going to have to be to where they play with that type of fire. And that's what we're going to have to see. That's what we're waiting to see is how does USC play with that type of fire consistently. I'm excited to see how this game goes despite the loss. I do think it will be a interesting game. I don't know where it's going to go because it's early right now, but this is, I believe, and I've said it a month ago. I think this game is going to dictate the Pac-12 South from here on. I really do believe that.
You would think at this point that it's either going to be this game or it's going to be Utah taking on Arizona State. Obviously, the USC loss today doesn't hurt them in the Pac-12 race. It's completely a non-conference loss, so they're still undefeated in conference play. Utah as well. And if anything, USC's get the one win under its belt in conference play. Number of comments coming in, Matt, concerning the officiating on the final call. That's a difficult call to make, and because it was ruled an interception on the field, if you were like me, you had that feeling, okay, the officials aren't going to overturn this just in a similar way as they wouldn't overturn it if they would have called it incomplete on the field. It's just not able to be determined based on replay. It's not definite. That's one call. Michael Pittman had a pass interference, offensive pass interference, and a toe tap play. I don't know how you feel about how the refs handled those situations.
The toe tap was difficult, and it's very difficult because you could say, oh, his foot was on the ground, or you could say, oh, it wasn't on the ground. The thing is, you got to go with the old NFL ruling on this for referees, is that if it's too close to call, you have to stick with the original call on the field. It's that simple on the toe tap. That could go either way. Should have been a catch. I couldn't say anything about that. I don't know how to feel about that. I knew it was going to go either way. The result was the result. The offensive pass interference call, I don't know how it was offensive PI when the defender initiated contact beyond 5 yards. Once he initiated contact beyond 5 yards, it hampered, it hampered Pittman's ability to be able to at least attempt to make a play. Now the ball was overthrown, and the referees, it could have went to one of two ways. It could have went defensive pass interference on BYU, or you could have just held the flag, don't throw a flag there, and that be that, because the ball was overthrown and you felt Pittman wouldn't have been able to make a play on that ball anyway. So that's how I felt. The interception at the end, again, close play, not enough to really overturn it. So that's how I feel about it. I don't think officiating really, I think if anything, where officiating played a major factor was the offensive pass interference call. I think that was a critical play that really changed things, because if that's a pass interference, USC probably marches down the field and scores and potentially wins that game. And then we're talking about USC winning a narrow game going into Utah. But oh no, I think the toe tap was hard to call, and the interception at the end was hard to call.
Another exciting day of college football, highlighted by BYU's overtime win at home against USC, 30-27. The Trojans fall to 2-1. The Cougars move their record to 2-1, and of course, they're in non-conference play, so a bit inconsequential for them to a certain extent. If you look at it that way, for USC, they dive back into the Pac-12 and the most important game of the year because of the head-to-head with Utah against the Utes on Friday night. So that's going to be all eyes that care anything about college football going to be focused on the Coliseum. I believe they're at the Coliseum. They played at Utah last year, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be at the Coliseum, and it's going to be a huge game. Jeremy A., appreciate the contribution. Thank you so much for the contribution to the channel. Much respect. As you say here, just venting about SC. So, hey, it's college football. We invite the trash talk as long as you don't make it personal. We invite the venting because it's a passionate sport and we love it. So, and we appreciate Matt because he's a professional on one hand, but at the same time, he writes for USC, loves USC football, and it's difficult to get on here after your team just lost an excruciating game like that. So, Matt, we always appreciate your time. Herman Lynn writing us in, hey, Mark, can you please comment on head coach Helton's fate the next 3 games, Utah, Washington, and Notre Dame? I will defer to Matt first. I certainly have my thoughts.
Honestly, I really think it's going to be it's going to depend. I really think it's going to depend because if USC, let's say USC beats Utah and then loses to Washington in a close game and loses to Notre Dame in a close game, I don't think they'll let Clay Helton go on that one. If he drops all 3, then you have to look at, okay, will they let him go? Is that it? I think that's where it's going to go. But I really think it just depends on what USC does down this stretch. Is the seat warming up after the loss to BYU? I don't know, to be honest with you. I wouldn't say yes, but I wouldn't say no at the same time. With no athletic director, that's going to be interesting because there's no AD there to really make that call. And you're gonna think that USC is gonna wait to hire a new athletic director to let the AD make the call if they're gonna fire him or not, because you don't want to fire Clay Helton and then you don't have an athletic director and you don't have a head coach for the football team, because that's just things just waiting to go wrong. I think they'll wait till they hire a new AD, and then they'll let the AD make the decision on Helton's future.
Makes total sense. So the athletic director runs the program, even if he doesn't make as much money as the head football coach, who basically makes more money than anybody in the state at any major program like a USC. So the power structure is set up in a kind of a strange way, but the AD needs to bring in his own guy. It's like a general manager in Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA. You don't want to put a head coach in place that the general manager is going to rub the wrong way, that there's going to be a butting of heads and the philosophies aren't going to match. You hire the AD, then you go with the head coach. I also have a thought about the USC performance. Is anybody surprised with USC's performance through 3 games? Has it been great? No. Has it been awful? No. It's pretty much what we expect. They drubbed Stanford. Now, how good is Stanford? Well, we usually think that they're going to be pretty good, like 8-4 good. Most of us thought this year. Maybe they won't turn out to be quite that good because it doesn't look good for them right now, but it's still Stanford, and they took care of business regardless of how bad Stanford turns out to be. USC completely annihilated them the final 3 quarters of the game. The other 2 games could have gone either way. They could have lost to Fresno State, but they outplayed Fresno State, so they won the game, and they should have won the game. They deserve to win this game. This game on the road against BYU, a complete toss-up. Now, should USC beat BYU? Absolutely, based on program status. But is anyone shocked that they lost to BYU on the road? No. We're not shocked. BYU's probably a top 50, 55 team in the nation. I still believe, despite the result we saw on the field today, that USC is a better team than BYU. If they played 10 times, I think they would win 6 or 7. They didn't get it done today on the road. I think we also need to take into consideration. So the performance on the field hasn't been atrocious by any stretch. They could easily be 3-0 right now. They would not be 0-3. They annihilated Stanford. So the performance has been fine. They do face 3 extremely difficult games, but you got to take into consideration true freshman quarterback, first and second career starts. That's a difficult place to be as well. I think the teams fought. They've played well. They fought hard today. That's another indication of how well the coach is getting through. But I think your bottom line approach to the decision and the structure of the way it falls into play, getting the AD in line, then the head coach makes total sense. And I think that's what they're going to do. If they implode and they're 2-8 after 10 games, yeah, I could see them saying, let's get somebody else in here to finish out the season. We just want him out of here. But if they continue to play 7-5, 8-4 football, which is, I think, where most of us had them, as being better than they were last year, but not significantly better, and in the division race, then he's not going anywhere. They may make a decision to move on to somebody else after the season, but I can't imagine Clay Helton's going anywhere unless they get blown off the field by 3 to 4 touchdowns the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, and you've mentioned it very perfectly, actually. USC is not awful, but they're not great. They're about where a lot of us expected them to be, and a lot of people have to step back and look at things from this view. Yes, they lost to BYU, and then you're going into a Friday night game with Utah, who's about to be who's likely going to end up being a top 10 team, or they're right now a top 15 team. Then you play Washington. Did anybody forget that Washington just lost to Cal? Then you have a bye week and you play Notre Dame. A lot of people have to take a step back and look at it like this. USC just lost JT Daniels, their starting quarterback for the season, to a torn ACL and torn meniscus. So that's a factor there. You throw in a true freshman. Yes, he played very well against Stanford, but Stanford also suffered a lot of injuries. And as you mentioned, they just got blown out the water by Central Florida, who's also an amazing group of 5 program. What we have to sit and go is we have to sit back and go, look, it's not the end of the world for USC. If USC gets blown out these next 2 games, then we got more issues at hand. But they were in a game that should they have won? Yes. Are we surprised that they lost? No. If anything, I think I was also one of the people like you, Mark, who said I would not be surprised if they lost to BYU on the road, because of the factors of you just blew out Stanford and because of what BYU does. That's just how it happened. That's just what it is. So we have to consider those factors there as well with USC. And considering what they have right now, USC's not doing a bad job at all. If anything, I could say they're, how can I put it? They're impressive. I don't want to say impressive, but they're doing a decent job. They're doing a solid job as is right now. But we see what this team is going to be when they play Utah and Washington these next 2 weeks.
And certainly anybody who locks in on my weekly predictions isn't surprised, because I said take BYU in 4 points. So you can get my weekly predictions down in the description section below. Wink, wink. You can get my predictions down in the description section below. They're not posted right this second, but if you go to any of the videos, the link is the Voice of College Football Community. You sign up for my predictions right there. And there you go. 31-20 against the spread. Doing well again today with a number of selections, including Arizona State in 15 and Iowa State right now. I took them in 1.5. So that's where we stand right there. And you can also turn that around and sign up at Bet Now, and you get double your money if you use the promo code MRTVCFB. BetNow.eu. It's in the description section below. Again, next to the hashtag Sam Strong. Money goes for a good cause, St. Jude's Hospital, and cancer research right there. So a number of YouTubers helping out with a volunteer roadshow to build this initiative. And again, you use the promo code MRTVCFB, Mark Rogers TV College Football, and you get double your money. And then you can choose to use my predictions or take a shot at it yourself. Got Matt Lowry on the line from Conquest Chronicles, SB Nation. Matt, before we let you go, we appreciate you jumping on board at a last minute request. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Again, as I mentioned, I think next week's game, we're going to see what we're going to finally see the story on what USC is going to be moving forward. Again, 3 tough games coming up. I wouldn't look too much into the BYU game other than they got outplayed, and again, Provo's a tough place to play. So we'll see how USC bounces back, and I'm interested to see what happens from here.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to check in on the primetime games and also the late night games. Oklahoma, UCLA, Iowa, Iowa State, Nebraska's playing, as well as Clemson, Syracuse, and Kentucky, Florida, as well, getting close to halftime or into the second half. We got Matt Lowry on the line from Conquest Chronicles. Matt, we appreciate you stopping by. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I enjoy being on.
That's Matt Lowry from Conquest Chronicles, joins us on a regular basis to break down USC football. We actually, if you want to get your USC football fix, because it's still not outdated, relevant information and analysis, we had Pete Gerson from Fox Sports on yesterday to talk USC in the Pac-12. And Pete will be back on this Friday after working the SEC game, that would be SC game tonight. All right, going to check out the late night action. I'll be back sometime, so check out the notifications. Stay in tune with those notifications. Keep it locked in on the channel. There'll be more instant analysis coming your way, both live and recorded right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Again, thank you so much for the contributions, and I think you get an idea of what we're trying to do right here, and that's build the best college football channel anywhere. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. See you guys very soon later tonight.